everybody. Welcome to day 2 of Source Fashion. My name is Graham Moran, and I am the Associate Editor of Drapers magazine. For those of you who don't know Drapers, it is a business magazine for professionals working in the fashion, textile, and retail industry. It's been around for, I'm just looking for my colleague to confirm, I think it's 137 years. I haven't been there that long, but I have been covering the industry for nearly 15 years. So hopefully we'll have lots of interesting things to talk about today. As well as the magazine, Drapers obviously has its online content. We also organize events and conferences such as this. In fact, we have the Drapers Conscious Fashion Summit happening next month, so hopefully see some of you guys there. And that's all from me in terms of introductions. Today we're going to be having a conversation with Andrew, and we're going to be talking about the topic of transparency. So I will have some questions for Andrew, and then we'll open up to the audience. So please do get involved if you have anything you'd like to ask. Very happy to be joined by Andrew, who is a serial retail entrepreneur. He is involved in several notable fashion and technology companies, most notably, arguably, Nobody's Child, the women's wear brand, which we will delve into a little bit later on. So, Andrew, why don't you kick us off by introducing yourself a little more? Tell us, how did you end up here today?
Well, I ended up here. So morning, everyone, and thanks, of course, for the invitation. That's how I ended up here. I was asked kindly to come and speak, and I took that on. I've been doing a little bit of this for the first time in the last 12 months, so it's all new to me, so forgive any rusty edges. But just to pick up on a couple of things, did you say 50 years you've been doing this for?
There's 15.
No way. All right, I needed that correction. And 2, I note you avoided mentioning my surname, so can I just hear you say that just for the benefit?
Andrew Zenny.
There we go. All right, great. So yeah, of course, thanks for the invite and thanks for everyone to come to listen. It's a pleasure to be here and talk. My format is actually, I prefer the discussion, the Q&A. I don't really like talking at people, so I'm grateful that Graham's going to lead us. But we will get to a point where hopefully we'll open the forum, and don't hold back. If there's anything that you think I can double click on, elaborate on, that will add value to what you guys are doing or be helpful. I love the fact that people can learn from our mistakes. There's no point in us all going through that same pain twice if unnecessary. So I am the founder of Nobody's Child. I babysit Nobody's Child because it is one of my children, but I have an amazing team that operate and run that business that I'm very grateful to. Thankfully, we're performing really well, and for those that don't know, we sold 30% or so to Marks & Spencer's about 3.5 years ago. So we've got obviously an older sibling that is a little bit bigger than us, which has been incredibly helpful, and we can talk about that in a bit detail later. But I've also got 2 technology businesses, Fabicus and Soretto. Fabicus is a data partner for retail brands and large IP owners, and Soretto is a referral technology for anyone selling online. So I do look after all 3, but I operate as CEO of Fabicus too.
Excellent. And you actually entered the industry via a family manufacturing business, which is obviously relevant to where we are today. You worked with a number of high street retailers. Tell us about that, and what did that teach you to where you are today?
It taught me a lot. So we come from very humble beginnings as a family. My parents had a small CMT factory in North London. I tried everything I could in my power to not get into fashion and retail, because growing up I watched them struggle and decided that I want to be the first in the family to sort of venture out into the wild. But it's like pulling a plug in a bath. At some point you're going to end up in that hole. And that was for me about 20 years ago. We found ourselves in a pretty interesting situation where I felt ready to do something, but I know I needed to focus. And my older brother at the time also found himself at a loose end, and I challenged him for us to start our own manufacturing business for the first time, serving the retailers directly. And so we ended up by default becoming manufacturers. We did have a small factory that would supply us and support us, which was my mum and the broader family. but we just went out into the wild. Actually, he is here today, somewhere hiding. I did see him walking around. My guardian angel's here. So Tom, who's the founder in New Look, they were our biggest client. So we actually built a successful manufacturing business over 10 years, being one of the key suppliers. There he is. I see him in the shadows. And so, all right, Tom. So we built a meaningful business supplying New Look, which changed our lives. It changed our families' lives. My brother was always passionate about product. I was more passionate about everything else, basically, operationally, and trying to be efficient and trying to strike a balance. And so we then decided that this is a moment for us to bring to the market a brand that was fast, agile, product first, but responsible at the same time. And it was more about ethical than sustainability. Sustainability, quite honestly, didn't even feature in our vocabulary back then. But we definitely wanted to do things differently versus some of the other success stories that we've seen in the UK. And that's what gave birth to Nobody's Child. So today I straddle retail and technology, but I ended up here for all of my sins.
You touched on it there. I was going to ask, obviously we're here at Source, the Responsible Sourcing Show. What does that mean to you? What does responsibility within the fashion industry mean to you?
I think taking accountability for all of the decisions that you're making and making those decisions and that analysis in a very considered way. You know, we are a commercial entity. We want to make money. It took us a long while to get there, by the way, but when we started to make money, it was about sustaining that profitability, but staying true to what we stand for, which is around that transparency and that honesty. Obviously, we've played around with the words over the years, but we've always been, or I'd like to think we were one of the early movers in trying to be a better brand or for better. And I'm choosing my words carefully because I can't, hand on heart, say that we're a sustainable brand. I don't believe that actually exists. But we are as close to the most responsible, I'd like to think, that a commercial entity can be in the current age. And so responsibility for us has become not necessarily our mantra, but certainly features quite heavily in everything that we do from an initiative, agenda, culture perspective. It's just making sure we go into every decision, whether it's sourcing, whether it's operational, with a view that, is this the right thing to be doing? Is there an alternative? And when we exhaust all of those options, then we can make a conscious effort responsibly, but without feeling guilty about those decisions. And today the team carried that torch incredibly well.
Perfect. To take it back to the beginning of Nobody's Child, I wanted to ask, why launch another brand? Does the industry need another brand? We're here talking about responsibility and sustainability, and I'm sure everyone's heard the phrase, the most sustainable dress is the dress that doesn't exist currently. You know, there's plenty of product out there. Why launch a brand at the time that you did?
Well, obviously none of those things featured, right? I mean, we just wanted to build a successful brand that was ethical and product first. And we were very passionate about doing that. But yet that wasn't enough. You know, unbeknown to us when we started, we were slightly naive. You know, I started to dabble in technology, and my brother said, well, you seem to be good at this technology stuff. How hard is it to have a website? And well, it can't be that hard. And of course, completely naive at how capital intensive that would be. We started Nobody's Child as a brand, and then of course on that constant journey to being the best version of ourselves, we wanted the best DC, we wanted the best product, and then eventually you look at the model and we went straight into the headwinds of logistics, customer acquisition, everything growing. A challenging retail backdrop meant that actually we were trying to build a brand in the most challenging environment. So we didn't set out for good, we set out with commercial purpose, but being good was always true to our heart. We owned our own factories, we had a vested interest in our own knitting and dyeing facilities, which we built over the years. And so we knew that I could walk into one of my factories and all my staff were happy, and that meant everything to us. And so we were like, how do we take this vertical capability, and I can say that now because I won't offend Tom, but rather than give it to everyone else, how do we do it for our own? And so we did it with the right intentions, but absolutely through a commercial lens. And now fast forward to this much more conscious consumer, well, at least if you're going to be there and you're going to exist, be the best of a bad bunch. And so that's where I think we live. And I think we do that incredibly well. And we take a lot of pride in that.
Definitely. Obviously, in the 10 years or so since you launched, Nobody's Child has been extremely successful. It's a multi-award-winning brand, several Drapers Awards. You, as you said, you partnered with Marks and Spencer's. You had investment from Marks and Spencer's. You became their first third-party brand, arguably spearheading that trend for third-party brands inside the likes of Marks and Spencer's and John Lewis. And you've opened several stores, several direct-to-consumer stores. Why do you think it's been so successful? Why did it land with customers the way it has?
I mean, if I genuinely knew that, I'd probably have about 50 brands.
I had to ask.
I would try and replicate. I think it's a combination of things. You know, we take a lot of pride in our product. We trade quite tightly. We pride ourselves on our operational capability, despite having all the same challenges as everybody else. But just to be clear, I mean, even the accolades were an amazing moment of recognition for us. You know, when we won Retailer of the Year back end of last year for the second consecutive year, that was a real moment, and actually a bit more special for me personally, because it was quite nice that I remember going on LinkedIn one day and then I saw one of my posts liked, and it was my mum's name. And I was like, what the hell is my mum doing on LinkedIn? So I called her, I said, what are you doing on LinkedIn? And she was like, well, everyone keeps talking about this stuff that you're doing and I don't know nothing about it and you won't tell me. So I thought the only way to stay in touch is to get on LinkedIn and find it. And that was a real moment for me, of course. And then she said, and you know, next time you go to an awards, I want to come with you. And I was like, you do realize when we go to the awards, we don't know we're going to actually win an award. And she was like, yeah. So then by chance, the Drapers Awards was coming up. And I said, look, you're more than welcome to come. Obviously, I'd love you to come along with me. But just to manage expectations, we won Retailer of the Year last year. There's no chance we're going to win it again. But it'll be still quite nice. And of course, we won. And having her with me at the table and my brother was amazing. So, you know, we're trying to recognize these small moments along the way. But the real inflection point for us to our success was, despite all the challenges in the first sort of 6 or 7 years, there were a whole load of green shoots. You know, we knew our KPIs were strong, so our conversion was good. That meant our product was good. Our customer acquisition was too high, but we didn't have the scale, so we knew there was room for improvement there. And if you look at the main pillars of building a pure play business, we knew we had the ingredients, but we just needed to improve. And so when we exhausted our liquidity is when I thought of, you know, how do I break that model? Because that model is challenged more now than it ever has been. And I met one of my investors on the technology side who is a retail analyst that I adore and hold in high regard. And I said, look, I need your help. And he said, what's up? And I said, well, we've run out of money. And I either need capital or reach. I said, if you give me capital, I'm going to spend it on reach. But if I get reach and I don't need the capital, I can keep the wheels on. And so we had a bottle of wine, maybe two. We explored the art of the possible. And he floated the idea of speaking to somebody like M&S. You know, we spoke about all the high street, but M&S in particular. And I said, yeah, you know, I get it, but no way. You know, we're young, we're relevant, we're everything. We had all the right noise around our brand. We'd won Young Brand of the Year, and they were, at the time, dinosaurs that were really struggling. And I said, look, before you pull that trigger, because I know these introductions mean a lot to you, I said, let me just digest it. And I literally left him that evening and walked down Oxford Street, where my office was, and walked into the Pantheon, their big M&S store, and I was like, God help us. But then on the weekend, I went to Bluewater, and I managed to drift off with my daughter, just to go for a little strut together. We walked into M&S, and I looked around, and I was like, wow, this store's beautiful. But the product's horrendous. So I called him from the store, and I said, look, I get it. I think we can do something. I said, just let me digest it for a couple more weeks. And then eventually I asked him to pull the trigger, and he introduced me to Steve, the CEO at the time. It took me like 5 months to get the first call. And for those of you that have ever engaged with Steve, he's very energetic. And so I get the first call with him, and he's like, Andrew, this is the most exciting conversation I've had in 2 years. This was like in the first 7 or 8 minutes. And I was like, amazing. He said, I need to see you. We need to meet next week. I was like, okay, amazing. He goes, my PA's going to call you. So she called me and said, I understand that I need to organise a meeting for you with Steve. I said, that'd be amazing. And she said, what time and what day suits you? And I said, well, I need him next Thursday from 2 till 6. And she said, I can't give you the chief executive of Marks and Spencer's for 4 hours. And I said, but then there's no point having the meeting. And she huffed and puffed and went off, called me back. She's actually lovely, by the way. Called me back 3 hours later and she was like, Steve, we'll see you next Thursday at 2 o'clock. So I met Steve, I took him on a tour to show him our distribution centre, our print studio. I wanted him to actually understand that nobody's child was a Trojan horse. We were doing just 1.8 million in sales at the time, but we had this engine behind us that could scale to M&S if the demand was there. And he got it. But in true M&S style, it took us nearly 2.5 years to get the deal done. The board rejected it the first 2 times. They didn't understand this concept of having a third-party brand when they had so many of their own priorities. Eventually we launched and we did like 500,000 in the first 4 days, so we knew we were dropping meat in a piranha tank. It was incredible. And then that became the building block for us. But today they're still less than 10% of our sales, but an incredible pillar and older sibling to leverage. And that, I attribute that to our success, the team, and of course our brand perception has played a key role. I've had an incredible couple of years socialising where people talk about the brand, the honesty, and it's lovely to hear that. So I think there's no one silver bullet. If there was, obviously, that would be transformational for a lot of brands. But I think taking a lot of pride in all of those pillars is quite fundamental to the success of the brand.
Definitely.
Sorry, I know I was long-winded, but I wanted to give context.
No, very good. I feel like I could talk to you about this all day, but we do have a topic we're meant to be talking about, so I'm going to bring it back to transparency for a moment. Obviously, I'm sure you'll hear it a lot over the yesterday, today, and tomorrow, but transparency is more and more, it's not just a nice to have, it's going to be driven by legislation, it's going to be something that brands and retailers have to build into their business, as well as things like EPR and ESPR. Regulation is coming that will essentially, hopefully, make brands and retailers more responsible. Let's use the word responsible. What are your thoughts on this kind of incoming legislation? And what are you as a business kind of looking at or prioritizing in terms of what, not just what you want to do, but what you're going to be made to do in this space?
Broadly speaking, I love the idea of the regulation. I think it will challenge a load of businesses, some for the right reasons, others not so much. We've embraced it as a brand. I think, the big one, of course, that we've become more recognised for is that we've implemented our digital product passports. And the QR code behind us, it takes you to that. So at any point, feel free to scan that. But the whole idea was the passport is the jazz hands, right? It's the front of shop where you're saying, look, we're being completely open and honest about everything that we do. But we were doing that as a brand anyway. We just never had a mechanism or a way of enabling that in the public domain. And the passport gave us that opportunity. So we embraced it very early on, and we're on our 5th generation now. Particularly nice moment for me because it happens that my technology business also enables that. And so watching both teams collaborate to bring something like this to market was quite a nice moment. But the legislative framework is already doing its job. I as a technology vendor, I work with most of the big retailers today, and I'm already watching them rationalize their supplier base, start to take more considered approach to what they're sourcing, where they're sourcing it from, the materials they're using, because they know this thing is coming. And so I'm a huge advocate. I do feel sorry for the brands that are struggling to embrace that because they've got other challenges as a business. But it's really hard for me to sympathise too much because I've also proven that if you want to do it, you can do it. So I have my own emotional tug of war with trying to support businesses as a vendor. But I'm banging the drum around, if you embrace it and you do it properly and you do it with pride, then the art of the possible is proven, and it's trodden ground. So I'm a massive advocate for it. I think it's a requirement that the consumer needs, the planet needs, And my team, I mean, they do much more than I could have ever dreamt of as a brand. I mean, half the stuff I find out through LinkedIn myself that they're doing, which is amazing. So that's a credit to the team and the culture that we've built. But I think it's going to prove challenging before it becomes a little bit more stable.
Yeah. So you touched on their DPPs, or digital product passports, which I believe you launched in your denim product. So it's a QR code on your denim products where consumers can scan it and they will find out all the information. I think you call it from farm to factory. So all the information about where the product was made, where it's come from, etc. That's obviously opening you up to scrutiny in a way. When we were preparing for this, you used the word honesty a lot, and sometimes being honest isn't necessarily, you don't want to be honest about some of the things you do. What's your advice around that, the scrutiny that you may be open to when you have to start revealing where everything is made and where everything's come from, and also how hard it can be to actually trace those things, to be honest about them?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, we've obviously implemented it, and we're very, very aware of any potential recourse. But again, I would face into those consequences with complete confidence and pride that we've done our best. There will be, for sure, flaws in what we've done, and there will be mistakes. But that's fine because we're learning. But we're still making a very conscious effort to lead the art of the possible. And that is something that, if you can do that with honesty, and I think the people that are most threatened by these challenges, of course, are the big organisations that are facing into potentially huge fines. They're in the public domain, they're publicly listed. They will face a different level of challenges. I can't really relate to that because we're still small enough where we can be agile and nimble, and we can learn from our mistakes and learn fast. But I don't think that should be a deterrent. And I don't actually think the legislation is there to penalise people for being transparent. It's there to make people accountable. And then when there is a mistake, if it transpires that mistake was a genuine and honest mistake, then that's fine. They'll work with them through the gears. And I think we've seen elements of that already, which should be comforting to the retailers. But if you're already staring at it like a rabbit in headlights and you don't know what to do, then that, for me, is something that needs to be addressed both culturally and as an organisation, because people should be adjusting anyway. And actually, the return on investment from a commercial standpoint is huge. There's so many benefits of speaking to your customer at product level and being able to deliver an amazing experience and build loyalty. I mean, we've got such strong metrics already that have demonstrated that return on investment. But the challenge I see with larger organisations is they operate in silos. You've got a function that genuinely cares, that isn't empowered by the leadership, and therefore won't be supported for implementation or adoption from the operational team. And if you don't get that right, and that's a cultural challenge, you're never going to be able to achieve this at scale. So I think that the challenges stem from deeper rooted challenges, not just what needs to be done.
I was looking around your website yesterday, and there's a section, and you click on it, and it will open an Excel spreadsheet, and that will list all of your suppliers and where they are and their addresses and their number of employees. That is a level of transparency you don't see from a lot of people. Obviously, everyone in the room wants to be as transparent as they can be, but that brings challenges. What's your advice of just kind of putting it out there, or do you sort of did you do a bit of work behind to sort of tidy up before you opened up? So, I guess what I'm getting at here is that sort of argument between greenwashing and green hushing as well. You're doing stuff, but it's not quite right yet, it's not perfect, you don't want to put it out there, but soon you're going to have to anyway. What advice do you have around that in terms of almost like pulling the plug on?
I don't think we had the luxury to do any tidying up beforehand, because the team are moving at such pace. New categories, new territories, licensing, stores, you name it. So they're stretched all the time anyway, but you've just got to rip the plaster off sometimes and face into it. I think it's more a reflection of our relationships with our supply base, which still needs a lot of love, by the way, it needs work. We're not great at that. I was speaking to one of our suppliers downstairs, which was nice to get some feedback. We listen carefully, and we try and take the right action. But in terms of putting our supplier base in the public domain, we're certainly not the first. Nike did it, I believe Inditex did it, a few of the big guys did it at a significant scale. Again, those that don't want to do it, I don't know, is it a reflection of insecurity? Potentially. We're just advocates for it. And if one of my suppliers decides, gets contacted by someone else and ends up working with them over us, but they're getting more money, then good luck to them. I can't stop that. It's like me stopping someone in my team getting a job and a promotion somewhere else. Culturally, that's not where we are. We pride ourselves on our relationships with our supply base. They're long-standing. And so putting them in the public domain for a brand that's performing actually should do them a whole host of good.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's been almost a bit of, or there should be, if there hasn't been, a mind shift of once upon a time your supplier list was kind of your secret? You didn't want anyone to know where you were making those dresses or those tops. Whereas now it's about sharing and saying, we found this great place and they do this great thing and it will really help you be more responsible. Do you think there's a shift in?
I don't think the shift is quite there. I mean, I've got my brother as a good benchmark. He still loves his supplier base, and I respect that. That's also a generational thing. He's 10 years older than I am, and that's how fashion was once upon a time. Nowadays, it's not quite like that. So I think it's going to happen more organically, and the legislation is just going to create a framework for it. We're certainly not so precious as a brand, but I do know others that are, and the legislation, by the way, still hasn't quite defined what needs to go into the public domain. So there is still wriggle room for, they're talking about potentially having another ledger that all that information is stored and visible to the governing bodies, but isn't available to the consumer and therefore everybody. And there's a whole load of big retailers and brands lobbying, but again, I would argue there's no smoke without fire, but that's my personal view.
Yeah. Perfect. We're going to try some audience questions now, I think, just because in case anyone has some questions, I know we're running out of time. Anybody want to start us off? We have a microphone if anybody wants to put their hand up. No? Okay, we'll keep going. I gave you the chance. You are a serial entrepreneur, as we've discussed.
I hate that, by the way. It didn't happen I didn't wake up one day and decide I'm going to take over the world. It's just, you plant these little acorns and you have no idea what's going to happen. And
Definitely.
Thankfully they're growing. So I'm very obviously proud of that. But it was an accident.
Well, it's a good accident. I would say you work in a kind of a cross-section at the moment of fashion, technology, and this kind of sustainable, responsible, tech, data-driven world that we live in. What's next? What's next for you, and what's next for the industry, do you think?
I think from a personal perspective, I've been doing this now for just under 30 years. I'm not in a hurry to stop what I'm doing. I really enjoy the sort of founder chairman role, helping my teams. The analogy I use for my CEO at Nobody's Child and equally my CEO at Soretto is an American football one, not because I'm a fan, but just because we all understand the concept. I give them the ball and I challenge them to run for the posts. And my job is to make sure no one touches them on the way. And that, I believe, should be the responsibility of a founder or a chairman who should be protecting their team and empowering them at the same time to actually go away and deliver whatever the joint vision is or the mission is. And they're both great. They've been with me now, Jodie about 5 years on NC and Pete about 6 years on Soretto. So they're loyal back. I'd like to think I've earned my stripes. Definitely something for consideration with Fabicus 2 in due course. So for me, I'll babysit those businesses and, will I own them in 5 or 10 years? I don't know. I've certainly got no appetite today to walk away from any of them. But I do like impact investing, the idea of it. I'm not so active anymore because I'm so consumed by my own stuff. But I like the idea of that, and Tom actually does that incredibly well, as well as his philanthropical causes and investments. I think that for me is a natural trajectory over time, is to support others and ideally support businesses that are going to have impact. And commercial impact too, actually transform. I'm not going to be behind the next water brand or the next sat-nav system. That's not what I'm interested in. I like moving the needle. I like things that are disruptive or genuine evolutions of legacy challenges that need to be fixed. And that's what I see for me over the next 10 years. But my partner and kids might have a different view on that. But that's where my trajectory, that's what I'm passionate about.
Great. You obviously built Nobody's Child from the ground up. It was a new brand, a new business. And as a new brand or business, you have the space to innovate and try new things. What advice do you have for any new brands or businesses in the audience in terms of starting off and hopefully following in your footsteps?
I think the big thing for me right now, well, there's two things. It's one, the culture, establishing the culture of the business and encouraging deeper thinking. I see a lot of people, a lot of the mistakes, a lot of the people I see in the big, sort of more mature corporate businesses, they're not applying themselves enough to the problem. And you need to really be obsessive about the problem and really think about what it is that you want to achieve, and then think back and reverse engineer, how do I get there? And I don't take credit for where Nobody's Child is today, but I've certainly contributed my bit. The most valuable contribution I made is by creating an equation of our business at sort of 200,000 feet and saying, for this to work, we have to go in and operate on these organs in this sequence. And that was an obsessive consideration. And I don't see enough of that in businesses. And I'm talking small businesses that I support, big businesses, really being passionate about what it is you're trying to achieve as a business, whether you're selling a product or a service, whether it's technology, whether it's fashion. I want to see that more. I want to see more obsession. You typically get it with the founders, and then it gets diluted. But then that's about culture in your team, the team you're building around you to be aligned with what it is you're trying to achieve. And I think that's a huge stepping stone for success. It doesn't guarantee success, but I believe it will get you halfway there. And if anything, it will get you through most of the challenges that you will inevitably face into. Because it's quite lonely at the top. It's hard. If you don't have somebody that you can talk to, it becomes very consuming. And it took me years to build my teams, but I treat them all now like friends. I get criticised for that, by the way, because that's a style. But I'm quite transparent, and I have an amazing rapport with the team. I speak to them like I will to a family member or a best friend, and therefore we go through the good and the bad and the ugly together. But I also empower them, and that's a cultural thing. So for me, the fundamentals are not always about margin and the operational excellence. It's a deeper integration into the team and an alignment that will set you up for success. It's a long journey building a business, any business. Nobody's Child, we're in our 10th year now. This will be our 10-year anniversary in October, so we're going to try and go a bit more harder this year with some of the things that we have in line. It's not an overnight success that everyone sort of thinks. And we went through incredible struggles. I nearly lost the brand, I would say, at least half a dozen times. We went into a pandemic owing 1.7 million to 128 creditors, and I wrote them all a personal letter saying, please be patient with me and I'll fix this. And thankfully, with the exception of a couple, they all did. And now, of course, we've all done really well out of it, which is great. But we're still in our infancy and growing. So I would just say it's a deeper rooted cultural alignment and deeper thinking, more consideration. Spend as much time as you need on that side of the fence before you put a stake in the ground to make sure that you know what you're doing, why and how. And you're going to make mistakes, but that's fine.
Great. On the kind of flip side of that, for more established brands and retailers, yourself, you've mentioned New Look, Marks and Spencer, those kind of bigger ships, steering them in a more responsible direction can be tricky. What advice do you have for anyone here that works for those kind of more established brands that want to innovate and want to take risks, but it might be a bit more difficult?
So the big shift I'm seeing, especially with the big retailers, is in the first instance, if you're going to really drive change, you need to understand the current state. And the thing that frustrates me the most is they don't actually know the current state. If you challenge a business today to give you an overview of the composition of their supplier base, their core materials, they've got little pockets of initiatives and activity, but in order to take real accountability with pride to then go off and do whatever's needed, first you must establish real visibility of the current state. And then you can take accountability. And then you slowly make changes. And those small little changes over time will lead to getting that big ship to move. I've also seen retailers culturally shift significantly in the last 18 months, which is great. The once upon a time sort of chief sustainability officer that was put in the corner just to tick a box, it's finally now got a voice at the table at board level. And so long as the CEO and the rest of the sort of shareholder base support them, then you will start to see, and I've seen much improvement. So, I'm not in a position to criticize them, but I do want to see them take more accountability. And with that, change will follow.
Definitely. Anyone brave to ask a question? We have one at the front. The microphone's over on the way.
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry. I just wanted to ask you a question. So I work for probably quite a new small brand, and I've just sort of like touched my toes, I guess, into the DPP world and harvesting the data from the suppliers. I just wanted to know, like, how difficult did you find that getting that data from the suppliers? Because obviously this is a new way of working where they're going to be asked more questions. And I guess, do you have any tips to maintain it?
Well, in the first instance, it was incredibly tough. And I'm being polite. If you ask my team, they probably went through the thick of the pain, I'm sure. What I will say, however, is I attribute that to education. Since we got better at the education cycle with our supplier base, they've been amazing. Now, granted, we've been doing this for at least 2 years, that level of granularity. So it's a much more established process. But that process stemmed from the deep thinking I referred to earlier in what we're asking for, why we're asking for it, when we're asking for it, who we're asking it from, making sure it's the right person within those teams, and then establishing a protocol to do that in the least friction way. So when you're then speaking to a supplier, like for example now, when we onboard a new supplier, we make it explicitly clear from the beginning, if you want to supply us, this is our way of working, this is why, and this is what it means for you, and this is what it means for us. And by supporting us with this level of information, we're bolstering our supplier base, which in theory should mean that you benefit from our growth. And actually, we are experiencing that. So I would say that don't be intimidated to ask them and confront them. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised once they understand what you're trying to achieve and why. They will listen, and if they don't, I'm happy to join a call and talk to them for you.
Yeah, okay. I'm Nadine. I'm a marketing and business strategist. And I was just wondering, you say you don't believe in sustainability that exists just yet in the fashion industry. Has just being transparent or the new legislations and regulations affected your business model or strategy, whether that's distribution or whether that's just logistical in any way? And is that why Source Fashion is quite important to come to understand what's new and how they are actually adapting to the new transparency, you would say, obligations?
I mean, it's a new way of working. It's a new mindset for us internally. But I will say that we had a bit of an unfair advantage because a lot of what we were doing, I would say probably 50-60% of it we were doing before, and then we gradually closed the gap. I still, by the way, personally, I think we're only 60-70% there. My team will probably argue that they're 80-90% there. We're certainly not 100% there. I think commercially, it's actually been amazing for us. And if that's the message that I'm able to get to brands and retailers, that embracing this actually has a huge positive impact on the business. We've seen our returning customer come back more frequently. She's spending more money with us. She's more loyal to the brand because she can trust us. We're recognized for our honesty because it's really about disclosing even when you make mistakes. So I would argue it's a positive impact. Now, the challenge, of course, it's going to be hard when you extrapolate that across everybody making the same noise. I get that, but then it will come down to the fundamentals: product, price, proposition, service. So we don't neglect those just because we're honest, but we want to be as good as we can at all of those things. But it's certainly a positive impact. And I just think that if you get the ways of working right and you can get this as an output, that will give success.
Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you. That's an excellent place to leave it, and we are seconds out of time. So thank you, Andrew, so much
Pleasure.
for being so open and honest. Thank you all for joining us, and see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you.